Thank you. Welcome, everybody, to the 7th session of our College Connections monthly webinar. This series is designed to give you a unique, inside perspective of the programs, people, priorities, and partnerships at the Penn State College of Agricultural Sciences. I'm Rick Roush, and I'm Dean of the college, and I'm excited to welcome you here to Ag Progress Days for a special session of College Connections. I'll serve as moderator for this session. Before we begin, I want to point out that we are offering this program both as in person and via Zoom. Please note that we are recording this session and we'll be sharing the link with all who registered. Please feel free to share the link to anyone whom you think might be interested in. Today's College Connection topics is the Pennsylvania ag economy. I'm delighted to be joined here today by Secretary Russell Redding. We will be discussing some of the issues and opportunities identified in the publication commissioned by Team PA and produced by EcoConsult Solutions, Economic Impact of Agriculture in Pennsylvania in 2021. Thank you. There's always some bug. After these opening remarks, we'll be addressing questions from both your online submissions and in-person audiences. Some of you included questions in your registration, and we'll try to address those first, either in our opening remarks, I've tried to tuck them into mine, or during the Q&A that will follow. If time permits, we'll take questions from the audience through the Q&A link on Zoom for those who are online, or at the microphones for those who you are here in person, the microphones in the back. So with that, let's get right to it. I'd like to welcome Secretary Redding here today and ask you to go first and set the stage for us. Thank you, Secretary.
Dean, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Great to see you, and those who are online viewing us, welcome to Ag Progress Days virtually, which is a first. We've had that experience with the Farm Show last year, and after all of the challenges of technology, it ended up being an incredibly important tool for us to reach Pennsylvania, so it can work. But to the Dean, and as I look around to the team here at Penn State, just a note of thanks. Very much appreciate what Penn State does in every day, but also does in partnership with the Department of Agriculture. You've heard me say it, there's very little that we could do without the support of our land-grant university in the mission. So very much appreciate what you do and your team across the state of Pennsylvania does for us. Also just want to say thank you as I look around this group today, a note of thanks to each of you for the last sort of 20 months. I think it's an incredibly important time in so many ways. Obviously we've learned a lot about our own capacity for managing things, our own threshold for pain. Our relationships have been rediscovered in some ways, but I think as a society we also have rediscovered food and agriculture and who's feeding us. And I think it's the silver lining of the pandemic. How do we continue that, I think, is part of the collective challenge here for us, both as a university and as a department. So thank you. But just to each of you for what you've done as well to bring us to this moment. We appreciate the work, and it's very much noticed and it's valued. The Ag Progress Days, there's two ways to mark time in Pennsylvania in agriculture. One's Ag Progress Days, the other's Farm Show, right? And how nice it is to be back with the Dean at Ag Progress Days in person, right? Being reintroduced to issues, being reacquainted with folks that we haven't seen in quite a while. But it's a good reminder to me, just how wonderfully complex this industry of agriculture is and how fortunate we are to work in it. Right? We get a chance every day to do things that matter to people, matter in their lives, matter in their communities. It matters on their table every day. And we get a chance to do that. So just a note of thanks to all who helped make that possible. In terms of agriculture, we'll talk about the economy, but again, looking back to put us in time, what's happened over the last couple of year and a half really is this reminder in some ways of just where agriculture fits in our society, right? It's at the intersection of some of the most important issues, thank you, Mary, important issues of our time, right? It's the jobs, the economy, the community, it's the environment, which we can talk about again today, but it's also about the quality of life in this Commonwealth. And I think agriculture is at that intersection of some of the most important issues of our time. In terms of our relationship with Penn State, again, it's really inseparable in so many ways. Whether we're talking about conservation, we'll talk about spotted lanternflies and invasive species. We'll talk about the economy of Pennsylvania agriculture. That is not something that we exclusively have control over, right? No one does, but clearly it's incredibly important to do that with Penn State as well. But again, just looking back a little bit, when I see what this university has done in terms of outreach and keeping people connected and educated and inspired in so many ways over the last year or so, a note of thanks to you. And to your team, whether they're in the labs at the paddle system, the Animal Health Diagnostic Lab, look at what Dr. Capucci and team have been doing. I think it's a wonderful story. So just to set the stage, the Dean mentioned the report that we did with the Team Pennsylvania Foundation. We could talk more about that, but just to say one of the really important changes we made when we with the administration was to center agriculture with the economic development programs, the labor and industry and workforce, the other instruments that non-agricultural sector use to advance their industry, right? We have a great relationship with DCED and the Governor's Action Team, with the Team PA is a public-private partnership. And one of the things we wanted to do was to address the issues of what is the impact of agriculture. That sounds like an odd question. I mean, in this room, you would have a pretty affirmative answer as to what it is. You get 10 feet from here, right, and start asking people about what is agriculture, you get different answers, right? You go to the northwestern part of the state and they will not mention mushrooms, right? You go to Chester County and they don't talk about the forest products industry. They're the kinds of things that we really wanted to sort of level set. What is agriculture? Who is agriculture? Because once you know what it is and who it is, you can decide what it needs. That was one of the important moments that we discovered in the report that sets the stage. The outcome of the study, $132 billion, 590,000 jobs, 18% of the state's gross economy is food and agriculture. So a significant piece of the economy. So that's all in the report. We can talk more about it today. But again, I'll end where I began with a thank you.
And likewise, thank you, Secretary. And we appreciate the close relationship we have working with the Department of Agriculture. And I want to thank Team PA and the department again for their investment in publishing this economic impact report, the economic impact of agriculture in Pennsylvania. I think it's fair to say that there weren't a lot of surprises for any of us, but there were still things to act on. And so maybe we'll get into some of those. It helped a lot to prioritize and focus resources. One of the things the report highlights is the total direct economic output of these sectors in Pennsylvania, as alluded to by the Secretary, is some $82 billion, something like that. That compares to about $1.1 trillion for agriculture across the United States. So Pennsylvania is roughly in there about 8% of the national total, so certainly not insignificant. The output of Americans' farms without processing and so forth is still about 1% of the GNP of the United States. So it's a huge factor still today. Of particular relevance to Pennsylvania, and I'll touch on it in my remarks later, is that California, now in the heart of the worst drought in 1,200 years, produces over a third of the country's vegetables and 2/3 of the country's fruits and nuts, and much of its dairy production. And I think something's going to probably have to change about that because the water isn't there to continue to support that level of production. So Pennsylvania State Extension teams go through a program development process that requires industry and stakeholder input into prioritizing program topics around which we focus our educational programs. Most of the topics listed in the Team PA report are also priorities for extension research teams. And for years, we've heard loud and clear the critical need for workforce training among all ag sectors. Penn State Extension has a long history of providing in-person educational programs, and over the last several years has invested heavily in state-of-the-art digital technologies so we can deliver education programs to all of Pennsylvanians. And I want to acknowledge that Mary Worth, who is operating the camera back there, was a major player in really driving us to take advantage of the digital opportunities. So these investments paid off tremendously during COVID as we were able to seamlessly continue to provide needed information via webinars, online courses, and Zoom meetings. The department's recent survey of ag sectors regarding workforce development and other surveys from Farm Bureau and industry and other meetings we've had in industry have all noted workforce training can take place in the form of 4-year degrees, 2-year degrees, and even larger extent certificate programs, workshops, webinars, online courses, training manuals, and especially apprentice programs. And our college is engaged in all these formats and is particularly looking to integrate more digital education in all of them so that people can get the online sorts of things, the things they might get from a lecture otherwise can get whenever and however they want it, as well as being able to turn up to things to education in person. So we partner with specific industry sectors in the creation of these educational programs. In 2020, stimulated by people having time on their hands and demanding information, we offered our online courses free for about 2 months. Brent Hales had a lot to do with that decision. And we thought this would be great to stimulate interest and give people, a bit of extra activity while they're stuck at home. But none of us imagined just how explosive it would be. We got up to 100,000 enrollments, and we thought that was pretty good. The context of this is in the previous year, there had been 30,000 enrollments. And within a month, we had about 100,000. And they kept going, 200,000, and so on. So by December, it was 613,000 online enrollments compared to previous years, 30,000 an entire year. Brent tells me that even after January, it's continued to clock along at about 24 to 26,000 enrollments a month, nearly an entire year's enrollment prior to COVID every month. And we're no longer just offering them for free. People are signing up. One of the most interesting and perhaps amusing things, it's the most popular course of all, was Better Kid Care, which was designed to train people how to set up child care facilities. Not what you'd think ordinarily Extension would be involved in, but then we're involved in everything rural. Why 300,000 people signing for Better Kid Care? Were they all setting up child care centers? Maybe not. Maybe they were looking for some help at home. But anyhow, it was tremendous, and it demonstrated that even communities who previously had been not that warm to the idea of digital education, necessity was mother invention, they've been driven to it, and the report calls on continuing to build on that enthusiasm into the future, and we're trying to do more with digital education to achieve it. We're also trying to address labor shortages in other ways, such as through research on increased mechanization. So in response to the requests from the fruit industry, we appointed 2 engineers who focused on mechatronics and so forth, and through their research, based here at University Park, but also at our Fruit Research Extension Center at Biglerville, they're making great progress in mechanical thinning and mechanical harvesting in both apples and mushrooms, just as a start of the sorts of things they're trying to do. On the issue of minimizing regulatory burden, which was the topic of many of the questions that the Secretary and I received, the college plays a key role in informing legislators and policy through research-based information. We also use that research to create science-based best practices and provide technical training in industry to make it as efficient and cost-effective as possible for producers, processors, and distributors to be in compliance with whatever regulations have been established. But we remain scrupulously politically neutral. So when people ask about basis and so forth, that's not something I get into a lot. But in any case, we'll come back to that question later too. So, for example, we've done a lot of extensive research around water quality, nutrient management, the development of best practices, and on-the-ground training to assist producers with Chesapeake Bay regulatory compliance. Some of our recent research demonstrates that cover crop species selection and mixture design can substantially mitigate trade-offs between nitrogen retention and nitrogen supply to cash crops, providing a powerful tool for managing nitrogen cropping systems. When the Food Safety Modernization Act was being implemented, ag producers across the sector voiced serious concerns regarding the impacts this regulation could have on their businesses and requested assistance from the college. And these regulations were really developed to improve food safety. Regulators had become concerned there were too many cases of food poisoning, and that there really needed to be a better effort to make sure we kept better control of the bacteria and other microorganisms that cause this. So we've done research and work with industry to develop and assist in the implementation of good agricultural practices for specific crops and industry sectors. We've also done a lot of education on land use issues, such as citing animal ag production facilities, science-based model ordinances, and research on land use impacts and options. Of course, we've always done extensive research on managing efficiencies and profitability through science-based practices in production, processing, packaging, and distribution. So we also do work on product development and functional foods that can help address nutrition and chronic diseases. Recently, the Dairy Futures Commission, which was commissioned by Senator Corman to look at dairy operations, specifically called out the college to expand technical expertise in dairy food processing, including quality control, regulatory assistance, manufacturing process, food safety practices, marketing and business development, as well as development of shelf-stable milk products and novel ones. Now, Secretary, we actually talked about this on a car trip to Washington, D.C. to talk about spotted lanternfly, and the Secretary said, what are we going to do about dairy products? And so we're still working on that. We've got some ideas. We're looking for funding to fund a couple of positions to really be able to drive this. So invasive plants, insects, and diseases provide serious challenges to agriculture and threaten the economy and human health. Research shows that if not contained, the spotted lanternfly alone could cost $324 million in losses to Pennsylvania. In the 34 counties, one person wrote in and asked about what are the levels of losses in the 34 counties in which it's already established. And the only estimates we have so far are really from economic impact study by Jay Harper and Tim Kelsey. Using data from 2017, they found that the direct annual statewide impact on agriculture was just short of 43 million. That's a lot. That's a lot already. But additional research is ongoing. The Penn State Grape and Wine Group received some funding from the Department of Agriculture to keep on top of this, and Claudia Schmidt and her team are collecting more detailed information. We'll have another report out soon. We're really especially concerned about the damage to the grape industry. One vineyard, Clyde Beekman's, has been lost to spotted lanternfly, and others we've been working with have basically been protected while we were working with them with heavy insecticide control practices, but we know that's not sustainable in the long haul. And we're especially concerned about populations getting into the Erie area. And so the college has started an initiative to try to work with growers up there to eliminate tree of heaven as much as possible in the Erie grape growing area to see if we can forestall establishment or at least reduce the impact of the lanternfly if it gets there. So in addition, there's a lot of other pest problems out there. Emerald ash borer is one that's wiping out ash tree in Pennsylvania. We were too late to stop that one from getting in, but we've got an innovative group in the university and have just made a hire specifically to try to breed ash trees for resistance to the ash borer. Just downhill from the football stadium, Kim Steiner, 43 years ago, planted a stand of ash trees collected across the range. And we discovered, we started looking at them, about 6% of them were not dying from emerald ash borer. And we're starting to try to evaluate those to see if they have some genetic resistance to emerald ash borer that we can breed into other trees. So we're still trying to work on the ones that have already gotten away. We're still very concerned about ticks and Lyme disease, mosquitoes and all the disease that they would spread. And we're really looking to try to protect Pennsylvania from these sort of ravages. Now, importantly, the animal ag sectors account for almost 70% of the state's agricultural receipts and could be just one disease outbreak away from financial devastation. We've been saying this for years, but just 10 days ago, we learned that African swine fever has gotten established in the Dominican Republic at one site that's less than 100 miles away from the border with Haiti. And it's probably a reasonable assumption that it's in Haiti as well. At a particularly, as you know, a particularly bad time politically for anybody to go into Haiti and try to do something about it. So this is going to really intensify efforts to keep watch on things. We're very concerned about such things as missionary groups going to Haiti and coming back without cleaning their shoes, people smuggling back sausages made in the Dominican Republic that might carry the virus. So the public has to get involved with this one, but this is massive. In 2018, African swine fever wiped out half the pork population in China, which is about 50% more than the United States produces in its entirety. So this is no disease to ignore. It moved across into Europe. I learned about firsthand what was going on in Ukraine a few years ago. In Germany, they have been unable to protect their pork industry from the African swine fever that's out in feral pig populations already. Germany's a pretty advanced society and good biosecurity, and they're still struggling with it. So I think it's a big wake-up call for us all to keep it out. And so we'll continue to rely on the expertise at our animal diagnostic lab, which is part of a triad, including PDA and the University of Pennsylvania. This is going to be a really big target moving forward. So I wanted to integrate some of the questions into my points, and one of the questions we had was, Do we expect aquaculture to play a larger role in food source capacity in the future? And it probably will, just by comparison. Most of our aquaculture is on the west coast of the United States and in the southern United States. I was in Mississippi when the catfish industry started to get established there, and it's Mississippi and Washington State run neck and neck at about $24.5 million a year in receipts, each for about 15% of the U.S. production. Most of aquaculture is centered along the Gulf Coast or on the West Coast. So there's a real challenge about what would happen in Pennsylvania. I might pause for a moment. One of the questions the Secretary was, will there be more support from government for growing this industry? Maybe it's a rhetorical question.
Well, I think to the first question, will there be, I would say there should be more growth in aquaculture. Yeah, it's always been a bit of a puzzle to me when you look at the per pound conversion, right? When you look at beef and pork and poultry, you look at fish protein conversion, I mean, it's incredibly, right, efficient.
It's very efficient.
It's very efficient.
Yeah.
So when you start just looking at it just from a protein standpoint, the logical answer is yes, right?
Yeah.
There will be. You look at the changes in ethnicity, you look at the market changes, you look at our dietary changes. So I think there's opportunity there. It does not exist in Pennsylvania to any significant scale. Now, I'm sure that just when I said that, there are folks who are in the aquaculture industry who will note, but we want to call that out in the next time we do the updated economic impact studies to really look at it, right?
Yeah.
We have a handle on it through the Aquaculture Advisory Board and Penn Ag Industries. But to answer the question, I think there's opportunity there to grow that segment of Pennsylvania. And then just when you inject some of the climate issues, when you inject some of the food safety concerns, and you inject land use into this model, I think it's a really intriguing question that aquaculture can and should have a role here in Pennsylvania and the region.
Yeah, I should say that some of the faculty at our animal science department are really enthusiastic about this idea too, but it's resources. One could contemplate trying to do aquaculture along the shore of Erie. I don't know that, I mean, we do lots of aquaculture offshore for tuna in southern Australia. They do salmon, Chile, Norway, wherever. Yeah. They're challenges, but anyhow, it's a possibility. We're also looking in the college at addressing, some of the questions were about climate change. So in the college, we're really trying also to address climate-smart agriculture, improving productivity under any conditions. One of the things that we have a really strong group in plant science now that's particularly focused on what goes on with roots. Because of the difficulty of observing roots, they've often been somewhat fallen behind other breeding efforts, but they've, for example, recently discovered a gene in corn that causes the roots to go down more instead of horizontal, with all kinds of implication for nitrogen use, water use efficiency. So we're also looking at ways for people to adjust nitrogen fertilizer applications based on site-specific measurements of what's coming out of cover crops and the like. A lot of the nitrogen losses occur because we don't know how much fertilizer apply at the acute times. Another part of climate-smart agriculture is the adaptation to climate change. So there may still be fervent arguments about whether humans are causing climate change, but it seems as though debates about whether it's happening have fallen by the wayside. Nobody seems to argue about that anymore. And what that means is we're going to have to figure out some way of adapting to the changes occurring. In Pennsylvania, the predictions are that we'll get more highly variable climate, on average probably heavier rainfall, but a lot of it will probably come in storms. We'll probably have a lot more impact of tremendous rains on hurricanes that moved all the way north, and they seem to be increasing in intensity and number. So probably it'll be hotter and on average more rainfall, but potentially sporadic is the prediction. That's the sort of world we have to adapt Pennsylvania to. And people are doing a lot of work on this in other jurisdictions, particularly looking at varieties, so the varieties can shift it and have a better match to climate as they go on. Another area is mitigation, which is to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It may surprise you that our animal science group is an international leader in reducing methane emissions from cattle. Work led by Alex Ristoff, looking at a compound called 3-NOP. And what's really interesting about a lot of this research that's been taking place here in Australia and elsewhere is if you do things to reduce methane emissions, you often get increases in feed efficiency use. And that's because these microbes are occupying the gut of cattle and so forth. Really, they're in it for their own gain. They're not there just to help the cows out. They're in there because it's a good thing for them. And so they're taking a lot of stuff that's coming in and turning into methane because it serves their purposes.
Mm-hmm.
But if you suppress them, a lot of what the stock eat will actually turn into meat instead. And so it's a win-win. You reduce methane emissions, you can get an increase in production. So we want to look for climate-smart solutions like that. So one of the questions we were asked was how will the climate change affect the expectations of Pennsylvania agricultural economy over the next 10 years? If we managed it well, it could improve the agricultural economy. We could pick up some of the fruit and vegetable production California won't be able to manage. Southern states are going to have increasing heat stress on the livestock. We could move a lot more of those north, and western Pennsylvania is a good place to look to put them. So there's a lot of things, if we design our future, there are a lot of ways we could benefit from climate change, but there'll still be downsides and challenges. Another question is ag science partnering with other colleges within the university with regard to climate change. It's a priority for the entire university. It's not just partnering with a few colleges where Penn State is definitely all in when it comes to climate change. And you will hear spokespeople from the university or international leaders about climate change. So it's a high priority for us. In the strategic planning of the university, it's probably the number one. So with that, I just wanted to also mention, before I forget, tomorrow one of the other issues was loss of small farms. I'm talking about that a lot today. We're hosting tomorrow a session on transitioning ag businesses at 1:30 here in this building. Secretary Reddick will join us again. We have Senator Vogel, various other people. And this started because of a conversation Secretary Reddick and I had when Dan Eichenlaub, a major landscaper in the Pittsburgh area, invited us over for lunch. I don't think we actually thought it was going to increase our work, but it did. Anyway, with that, Secretary, I'd like to pass it back to you.
Yeah, it's one of those, to the last point, just a really nice conversation that we didn't go there expecting to talk about transition, right? But it was one of those observations that somebody who's in the agricultural family makes about agricultural transitions and about what are we doing, right? And I think it was an honest question, and somebody who really is well informed. I think by the time the lunch was over, there was a better sense of, there's a lot of things, actually, through farm vitality grants, the work that the Senate did last year as part of our farm bill and the new and beginning farmer transition, but also you can do all the program stuff you want. At the end of the day, someone has to sit down and start talking about a transition, right? I think that's part of the story of you've got to take the steps. We can incentivize that in different ways, but ultimately you have to say, do I want this business to move in a new generation to a new generation? How do you do that? So look forward to that conversation. On the climate change, there are a number of questions and comments in this regard, and certainly it's top of mind for all of us, as it should be. I think part of this conversation now is we find ourselves sort of thrust into is sort of, where is agriculture? Where do we want agriculture to be in climate change? I think it is certainly, it can be looked at both as a negative and a positive. When I look at my work in the farm and what I do in agriculture, we've got this very intimate relationship with the climate, right? Everything I do is climate dependent. So it tells me that in terms of engagement, that we need to be in that conversation about what it is that we're doing. And importantly, get the right terms, right? We spend a lot of time talking about sequestering. Again, this group may know what carbon sequestering is. I like to think about it as carbon management, right? Like we do nutrient management. We're managing carbon. That's what we're asked to do. You can sequester it, you can sink it, you can use all kinds of terms. So a couple of points. One is, I think, just the terminology and making sure that as we speak of it, is that we use the right terms to put it in perspective and give some context to it relative to other environmental legislation or conservation-related program activity. Two is, I think part of the conversation has to be what we've already done to set the stage for a really intelligent conversation about how agriculture plays in the environment, right, and on climate. How do we do that? We point to what we've done in the Chesapeake Bay for the last 25 years, right? We look at what NRCS and the conservation practices that they've identified as climate-smart agriculture practice. You look at that list, they're all things that each of us in ag have been doing and supporting. So how do we use that framework to really talk about what climate, the impact of climate on Pennsylvania agriculture, but also I think the opportunities around climate. And third is, as we step further into this conversation, you know, the Secretary of Vilsack and the federal administration and Congress are all sort of engaged in this. My ask would be to the agricultural community is to not back away, right? Actually step forward. Because that conversation is going to be led by people who, you know, something's going to happen. Let's make sure the right things happen, right, in the way that we want to frame that. And it's by making sure that we get credit for what we've already done. We talk about the practices that we're employing. We look at our management systems that we have, whether that's grazing, whether it's the nutrient management, the conservation practices. And then the final point from me would be, and when I think of climate, I think of it it's an and, right? It's climate and rural development. It's climate and food production. It's climate and health. It's never just climate, right? You need context. And I think as we think about Pennsylvania agriculture, we think about Pennsylvania society, you know, and their concerns, I think if we put it in context, so climate and research, right? There's always a connection to what it is that we're doing. I have found that brings some comfort to an issue that has been politicized, unfortunately, right? And when that happens, then we sort of lose the context, we lose the engagement, we lose the really creative thinking. And I think just again, for Pennsylvania, the state with, first state with the nutrient management law in 1993, right? So we talk about, you know, programs, we talk about practices, we talk about verification. There's an amazingly deep data set that looks at the value of conservation practices on water quality. And I think those same practices can be extended to look at the impacts on climate. So a lot we could talk about in that space, but I just would ask you to think about your role, our role, and where we should be in this discussion. Because the concern, while it's wetter and warmer, the piece that I worry a lot about are the invasive species, right? The warmer it gets, it magnifies disease risk. And I think that's one of the greatest threats to climate change that we are facing is disease risk. Animal, plant, human, all of those are risk.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where we can take advantage of climate change, but it's going to require planning. It's going to require better planning for floods because we're surely going to get them. Better management of invasive disease risks like this. But if we start now to plan for how to design the system for the world to come, the future to come, we could take advantage of it. But we have to get going on planning. Yeah. I forgot that I mentioned that I threw up a slide for spotted landfly. If somebody could advance it for me, I just want to show them, people had asked about where the losses were at present. Is there someone who could advance the slide? Do I have a clicker? Well. Oh, it's not that big a deal. I just thought, it's right under my nose. Right, so this is where it is now in Pennsylvania. The counties that have been included in the quarantine that are in a different color than the rest are the new ones. A lot of those counties have only got a few sites in them, but the whole county has been quarantined at this point. And if you the climate prediction maps, basically, if you just extended that, just the lower southwestern corner of the state, it would basically include everything in the state where we expected to get established, even though most of those areas is pretty light. It would just go to the southwest, and then it would go up into Erie. It would pretty much finish off its range distribution. And it keeps going elsewhere in the United States. That's a map of the United States so far. We've got a population that's found in Ohio, and just the last few weeks, a population was found on the western side of Indiana. So it's moving by leaps and bounds by human-assisted ground transport. So we still got to tighten up on that. Secretary, one of the questions I didn't pick up, and maybe you would like to take a crack at, is any proposed federal infrastructure packages, what investments would be most helpful to the agricultural economy of Pennsylvania?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question, timely question. And again, there are any number of components inside the infrastructure package for that are good for Pennsylvania, right? I'll start there, right? Because at the end of the day, whatever we produce has got to go somewhere, right? So it goes by road, it goes by rail, it goes by ship. So they're the baseline investments in the infrastructure bill, and I think that's important. With that, there are investments in, we just mentioned this, but invasive species plant elimination, right, is part of the infrastructure package. I think that's important. There's also pollinator-friendly investments that are there. The biggest one, probably second to road and bridge infrastructure, is the broadband. And what is in what is in this infrastructure bill. I forget the exact number on total investments in broadband, but G.T. Thompson mentioned it yesterday. And then there are some bioproduct program. There's a pilot program looking at alternative uses of agricultural commodities and in construction and consumer products. So there's a lot inside. I always ask the question, you know, as you think about infrastructure, it's a little bit like the word agriculture, right? What does infrastructure mean, right? And what does that look like? If we went around this room, I'm not sure what would surface as the priority infrastructure needs, but I'm guessing, you know, roads and bridges and those things that are irritants back home, right, that you can't get the milk truck across or logging truck, right? But what else? What would you like to see in the infrastructure? At a personal level, I have this running list of infrastructure needs as a result of the pandemic. And some of those are, you know, value-added processing, and our governor's action team is here today and knows this very well, but you know, there is a growing list of infrastructure needs for agricultural processing and value-added processing. We're doing okay, but I think we come out of the pandemic with a whole new list of what is needed. So hopefully some of that can be addressed inside of the infrastructure package.
So animal processing, having multiple routes for animal processing to go a pinch, we got that emphasized by COVID, and then we got thumped again and reminded with JBS being hacked. That it's not just COVID that can knock you out. There's other infrastructure challenges. So we have to devise some system that our meat processing can be more flexible in its delivery. Still have a little more redundancy in the system. One of the questions was asked was, how big a problem is the spread of poison hemlock and spotted water hemlock in Pennsylvania? And for this, I asked our Weed Science Brain Trust, which includes Jim Selmer, our governor, and Dwight Legenfilter, and they all responded that they didn't see those as being a particularly big problem. That the poison hemlock's been around roadsides. It gets very obvious at times this time of year, but they don't feel that it's changed dramatically in the last 20 years or so. And spotted water hemlock is native. These guys are far more worried with the major crop weeds they've got to deal with, Palmer amaranth, water hemp, and mare's tail, many of which are increasingly resistant to herbicides, which is a challenge in its own right. So, you want to take this question about, one of the questions was, if the U.S. administration succeeds in elimination of stepped-up basis and property sales, will this be the death knell for farm transfers?
You sure you don't want this one? You know, so again, you've been following this conversation on the infrastructure package. How do you pay for the infrastructure, right? So there's been a lot of debate about that. GBO came out last week and said it's going to add to the deficit. Well, inside of that, how do you pay, is this provision about the stepped-up basis, right? So for those who are in agriculture and work in the finance and tax field, I mean, the stepped-up basis, it's a challenge presently. I'll just say we continue to work on this issue. We were encouraged by Chairman Scott, who's chairman of the House Ag Committee, and his expression of concern on that. American Farm Bureau, seeing Rick Ebert here, and others have expressed this concern. I don't know if it's the death knell, right? It is certainly, it's an unintended consequence of, I think, all of this, right? We're trying to get the infrastructure made, and now you've got a potential for, the tax rates changing from, 21 to 28%, and the capital gains tax going from 20% to about 37%. So it'll be difficult to deal with. The Texas A&M also did a study looking at the impacts. They had a data set of about 100 farms, and the majority of those would have significant financial implications if these tax changes are gone through. So we certainly don't want to make it any more difficult to transition those farms from generation to generation. That is not to say that in the capital gains world there's not an opportunity to pay more than we're paying today. No one wants to pay more. But again, if the offset is you get significant investments in rail and transportation and ports and broadband, all of this is a balance, right? So that's what this discussion is about. But on the surface, it is problematic, and we continue to work on it.
So we have Mary.
Okay, we have a question from someone online. Important economic development focuses like workforce, innovation, and entrepreneurship could benefit from focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. How have leadership sought to advance agriculture in Pennsylvania in these ways? And any audience members that want to come and ask a question, please feel free to do so. I'll leave that one with you.
Do you want to start?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part, the introduction, Mary. What?
Important economic development focuses like workforce, innovation, entrepreneurship could benefit from focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. How have leadership sought to advance agriculture in Pennsylvania in these ways?
Yeah, good. Well, I think it's a great question, and thank you for asking. Certainly, we pride ourselves in agriculture, being diverse, right? It's the Amish, the English, the rural, the urban, it's the commodity representation, all of that. I think diversity ought to be honored, and it should be celebrated, it should be recognized, right? And then inside of the diversity, inclusion, equity and inclusion, I think we have to be very intentional. Again, that's a lesson coming out of what happened over a year ago with the death of George Floyd. Personally, looking at that and feeling compelled to express concern about what happened, obviously, to the family, but also in society, and recommitted to looking at how we as a department address the issues of DEI. One of those is looking internal first, right? Looking at the department and saying, what are the policies, what's the environment that we're working in, and with some good employee feedback, had some great perspective, and stood up a committee, a just committee to look at these issues of DEI internal. The second part of that is external, right? We've got to look also outside of the department into the greater agricultural community about how do we recognize that diversity, right? Yeah. And there's a lot we could say in there, but I guess it's a bit like the conversation on climate. There certainly can be sensitivities around the issue, but it's one of those we have to have as an industry about who is in the industry, who is welcomed in the industry, how do we treat them once they're here, and how do we cultivate cultivate this new generation of wherever they are on life's journey, that they're welcome inside this industry of agriculture.
Yeah, it's a really huge issue in the university as well. Basis of a lot of debate in the university about how we can expand our diversity, equity, inclusion. As a college, we also realize that we particularly serve Spanish-speaking audiences. You can't help but go to dairies or mushroom farms, any place you go, potato processing, anywhere you go in the state. It's pretty obvious that Spanish speakers are a big part of our labor force. Brent Hales, stand up and wave, there we go. Brent Hales is still reasonably newly appointed director of Extension, and he's made it a high priority as well. And we're trying to do more to recruit students from urban areas, or at least peri-urban areas. We link, reaching out to Saul High School in Philadelphia, for example, because if you just sort of work the demography, if we're not getting enough farm workers out of rural areas right now, you just work the numbers. You're going to have to get them out of urban and suburban areas in order to fill the gap. So we're trying our best with programs like 4-H to reach out to people that are not growing up in urban areas, not growing up in rural areas, but still interested in agriculture. I mean, I was one. My uncle farmed on the hill above me, but I never really managed I would go into agriculture until I got into university and got lured back into it. But we have to broaden our reach, and that includes going to groups that are otherwise underrepresented in agriculture and get them more involved in agriculture, forestry, and the like. It's a major goal for us. Boots? Boots, it'd be good if you go to the microphone. Otherwise, the people who are, Mary will bring you the, because otherwise the people who are online won't be able to hear the questions. Thanks.
Yeah, getting back to the discussion about transition farms, I understand the concern about capital gains tax stuff, but Pennsylvania has made some major improvements. A couple of years back, there was a fiscal code was changed to allow farmers to transition to their sons, daughters, nieces, nephews, elimination of inheritance tax. And my daughter and son-in-law just recently bought a farm, one that I've farmed for 40 years, hoped to own, but they're going to own it now. That they were allowed through Act 13 because they were beginning farmers, and the owner was a preserved farm owner. They were allowed to exempt the transfer tax for those two folks, and also the owner of the farm, because she was working with young farmers, beginning farmers, is going to get some cash back in capital gains. So this is a certain concern now, but Pennsylvania's been a big leader in trying to help younger people get involved in agriculture. I'm very thankful for that. So,
thanks, Boots. Other questions?
Dean and Secretary, what are your long-range plans to have agriculture put back into the classrooms from K through 12 so that we can get the young kids involved? Boy, it's going to be a tough road, but let's do something about it now.
Right. Well, there's been some debate about changing educational policies on that. And I mean, one of the things we're doing as a college is maintaining an agricultural education group that helps, train future agricultural educators in schools and provides at least a bit of a nucleus to keep driving the capacity to train in agriculture and also some enthusiasm for doing it. So that's what we're trying to do at that level. But there's also been moves in the state government to either increase or decrease the focus. Do you want to comment on that, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and again, I think it's a piece of this work that we're doing within the Commission on Agricultural Excellence, and we were charged, Senator Vogel in the Senate some years ago, to stand up this committee. And it's been interesting because it has both the formal ag ed component, right? We want to grow the number of ag ed programs in the state, but we also want to look at the K through 8 curriculum and what we can do. On top of that, looking at what we've done with the farm to school initiatives and ag and youth grants, getting inside the schools to talk about food and agriculture. I think the moment is ripe for that. And then you've got the state standards component, and to what extent they can influence what the science and ecology standard is, and where we place the emphasis on food and ag within particularly the elementary and middle school curriculum.
Thank you. I had environmental studies in high school, and also ag. I put ag back in the classroom, and as soon as I retired, the school took the whole programs out. No greenhouse, no outdoor classrooms, no nothing.
Yeah.
And the administrations in these high schools, they just don't care about agriculture. So let's get it back on track.
I think it's important to get better. I mean, the United States isn't unique like this. The same problem occurs in Australia. And the college I was in charge of had agriculture and geography. And the geographers in agriculture were both jockeying with each other to get into the school curriculum. And I said, hold it. I mean, geography is really important, but it's, philosophically, can you really tell me it's more important than teaching people where their food came from and how to eat healthy? It's got to rank up there with history and geography and everything else. So I think we just have to keep reminding people that, it's an important subject in its own right.
One of the ways we try to address this whole issue is with our 4-H program. I think it gives us access to a lot of kids in a very diverse range of communities, and that's a good thing. Here locally, and also in our extension offices located around the Commonwealth, we do a lot of field trips, and so we bring students in here, youngsters, first and second graders, and we expose them to where their food comes from, the work we do in the Pasto Museum, showing, where we've been and where we're going. All of these things make some contribution, but obviously it's not a set curriculum, and it's unfortunate that people they're at least a generation removed from where their food comes from, and it's a really important issue, I agree. And from a recruiting standpoint, it's really important to us in the College of Ag because, quite frankly, we can't rely on the 1.7% of the population that's actually involved in food production as our future. Those people are extremely important, don't get me wrong, but we have to rely on the best and the brightest from all ranges of life in our society and find ways to get them excited about the tremendous opportunities and impact you can have in a career in agriculture as we broadly define it.
Yeah. In the interest of full disclosure, that was Stephen Lurch, who's the Senior Associate Dean and also the Acting Dean for Research at the college.
And as Director Hales reminds me, we have 95,000
4-H kids.
Youth involved in 4-H in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. In Australia, we were trying to turn this around, and we actually commissioned studies on what got students into agriculture, and it was a bit amorphous, but one common theme was at some point when students were young, like before they got into high school, they had a positive experience on a successful farming operation because a cousin or a friend of a friend, but almost all of them had some kind of a positive experience that lasted longer than a couple of days in a successful farming operation. So that might be a clue. This agricultural tourism, a good thing, but you need to get them engaged in it for more than just one afternoon visit.
Yeah. If I could say 2 points. One is I think it's just back to the Ag Impact Study. Right? Again, how you define agriculture really becomes an important part of the conversation locally about what is agriculture. Right? And I've just asked us to look at that definition that's inside the Ag Impact Study. It's very comprehensive, it's very inclusive, because it helps to start conversations locally. 2 is never underestimate the power of the principal. We have been in schools in the very deep parts of the state, and I can think of one at Fox Chase Elementary. Everybody wants to talk about Philadelphia school system. This principal figured out how to use agriculture as the platform in a K through 6 school to teach agriculture and meet the state standards. Every single student. And you come out, and the first thing you do in the school, you look up, right? Every building is 100 feet high, all concrete. But inside that classroom is all about agriculture. It's fascinating. And for those who were at the Public Officials Day 2 years ago, you heard that principal speak during the Public Officials Day, right? That's the guy. And he just made up his mind. He was going to figure out how to teach food and agriculture. And so we need, the point is well made, that you need to have a system in place. So it's universal about how we measure and test and expect outcomes. But there's also opportunity front side. Thank you.
Other questions?
Different. They always say what goes around comes around. And there's an awful lot of talk about, and the dean mentioned it, the measuring the methane production in ruminants, and I'm going to say all ruminants because they're all the same. Is there any thought of bringing back the use of the Ormsby calorimeter where you can control the total atmosphere, or maybe with modernizing it, of course,
I think
or something similar so that we can really get a true measure of that methane.
I think they've gone well past the calorimeter now, where they use so-called interferometers, so they actually can measure the level of methane being emitted in a field or whatever by passing infrared laser through it and seeing the signal, how the signal changed. So they invest in these sophisticated lasers that work in the infrared scale. The sort of high-tech stuff that's going on, it's pretty, and looking at methane emissions and so forth is pretty impressive.
Any other questions?
Good.
I just wanted to point out, you had a question about workforce development and diversity earlier. To the Secretary's credit, when he came in, he established a position within the department that specifically tasked with expanding that, and I work with Sarah very well. And the commitment is there, and the desire. And, you got lots to think about, but leadership is thinking about it and is acting on it. So.
Yeah. Yeah, Tim, thank you. I mean, I jumped to the DEI part of that conversation. I think the workforce was sort of a statement versus a question, but it is the issue of our time, right? I mean, every single conversation I've had, even since arriving here this morning, it starts with or ends with workforce, right? And where are they? How do we find them? How do we attract people to this industry? How do we inspire people to do jobs, where, it can be a challenge, just to, to have the technology, catch up to where I think we need to be. I shared the story with some that last week, and it ties back to the African swine fever and just how challenging it is. I'm standing in an orchard in Adams County with a family from Haiti who had just arrived, right? And they've come to Pennsylvania for the last 39 years, husband and wife team from Haiti. So immediately thinking about African swine fever, that these are folks who just came in to do their job, right? But it was one of those reminders about how quickly the disease can move. But the point in all of that was, they said, but our children don't want to come here, right? So that was fascinating that they've done it their lifetime. So my whole point is this whole workforce discussion, right? It's about degrees, it's about skills, it's about competencies, but it's also about attracting people into this business, right? Who really want to be in here. We know we're competing with every other job because the skills that we define as our skills and our competencies are the ones up the street is defined as their needs, right? We're in competition for those folks. So really important conversation about how do we satisfy the needs of agriculture from a workforce standpoint. It's getting it's tied to the schools. It's making sure that people understand the meaningful employment inside of this industry. But it's also how we present it, right? This has come back to me many times, is how we present the opportunities of agriculture. And if we look at it in one dimension, it's the one dimension that people know, right? If it's the multiple dimensions about what the skills are and the competencies and how inclusive we are and how accepting we are, all of that begins to change the dynamic about how people view this industry. But it comes back to defining it, and then I think being very intentional about attracting people into it. It moved from sort of homegrown, and then it went to hope, right? We hope somebody shows up to do this job, and now it's getting beyond hope, right? It's about it being very intentional about the people we want in the industry. How do we get them in here? It's the degrees, but it's also the apprenticeship work that is being done. It's about the credentialing. I know Dean, you've spent a lot of time with your team looking at that, what Extension can do to credential employees and people for employment. So great conversation. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, so hope is definitely not a strategy for this one. And the apprenticeships, it's really important that if somebody comes and does an apprenticeship, the people who are leading apprenticeship have to make it fun. They have to show the apprentice that there's something beyond the drudgery work that the first new hire gets. The apprenticeship is more than just showing them how to do it. You have to show them there's a real future in doing it. So those apprenticeships are really vital in so many ways, getting more people into agriculture. Yeah. Mary, I think I've failed in one task, and that is I've forgotten when the next College Connections is, and what the topic is. Yeah, that's right.
15th.
September 15th, and the topic is? So it's on genetic modified agriculture for enhancing food and so forth. We've got both Mark Giltonen, who works on cocoa and has done work on making transgenic plants, and also Jason Raskin talking about transgenic insects. You may be interested that a long-time goal for trying to control malaria in Africa has been to try to change the malaria mosquito, and a large-scale experiment was run in cages in Italy recently and showed that it looked like it could work, that they could actually introduce a so-called gene drive mechanism and basically suppress the mosquitoes in large cage experiments. So it's kind of a world first. They'd really like to get it in Africa next. So we'll talk on things like that in the next College Connections. Thank you very much for coming.